Welcome back. Well, we're shifting gears now to developmental leadership issues. And we've got, as you've seen there, Professor Kingsley Moghalu joining us this morning from the States. He's a former deputy governor of the CBN. He was a presidential candidate in the 2019 elections. He's currently serving as the United Nations Development Program Special Envoy on Post-COVID Development Finance for Africa. Good morning. Very early, I must say, from your time there. Thank you for joining us today on the program.
Good morning, Chamberlain.
All right, so let's start off with this just briefly about your UNDP functions, COVID funding for Africa. I think we just saw some of the dailies here today that the governor of Ekiti State was speaking at Chatham House, saying Nigeria raised, I think, about $95 million for COVID in Nigeria. How is your role, or what is your role regarding how does it benefit Nigeria? You know, they say it starts from home.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. At the beginning of December, the United Nations Development Program approached me and asked me to take on a high-level special assignment as its special envoy on post-COVID development finance for Africa. And the whole task and the whole point is this. Everybody knows that the COVID pandemic has had a huge financial and economic impact on Africa, as it has in many parts of the world, but African countries have been far less able to cope with it and have had to go into a lot of borrowing to respond to the fiscal stress of COVID. And so I was asked to lead a team based in New York to assess the level of stress on various countries' finances and economies on the continent, and to recommend alternative ways that African countries can raise resources, mostly from their own countries, to respond to the pandemic and stabilize their economies. So this is what it is, and we're working on this assignment currently, and we expect to complete it in about a couple of months, and there will be a high-level event where our report will be launched to the international community with recommendations to African countries, including Nigeria, of course, on how they can get out of this stress.
We look forward to that and hope that all ends well. And then about this latest venture of yours, you have your hands in a lot of things, as a matter of fact. This one called the NC Front. We understand there's a new political movement that was launched alongside yourself, Professor Otomi, and several others. Tell us about it. What is the ideology behind this movement?
Well, the National Consultative Front is not a political party, I must hasten to be clear. It is a political movement of concerned Nigerians, and it was convened by several notable Nigerians who are passionate about the future of our country, people like Olisa Obakoba, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, Pat Utomi, Umar Galina Abba, Obadiah Mailafia, Hakim Baba Ahmed, myself, Professor Mrs. Remi Shonaya, and several others. So the whole point of the National Consultative Front is to really serve as a rallying point, as a cry to the conscience of Nigerians, for Nigerians themselves to really stand up and decide their future, take their future in their hands. We're calling for a constitutional reform, most important. That's really the main focus of the National Consultative Front, you know, that Nigeria's framework has to be renegotiated to make Nigeria function very well and very effectively. So that's you know, we're also calling for electoral reforms. And of course, we are concerned very deeply about the current crisis of insecurity in our country.
So you said categorically that the NC Front is not a political party, but you also say that you need Nigerians to come on board. So I'm wondering, how will that happen? Because for a lot of people, they see political parties as that platform that will give you a voice to make the kind of changes you want to make. So what exactly is the game plan here? Because in that statement you put out, you said that you want to first mobilize Nigerians for a brand new people's constitution that can be that can enable Nigeria work for all and be rid of corruption and self-aggrandizement. But how will that work, really? How strong and how do you plan to galvanize people without being a political party?
Well, there are many ways. I think if you want to be objective about it, there are many ways on many platforms on which Nigerians have been and can be galvanized. There are civil society movements. There are, religious bodies. There are just ordinary citizens that you can reach through the media. So citizen action is the name of the game. And even though, of course, the whole goal is political, but not at this point in a partisan way. It is for the good of all. And we are simply serving as a catalyst at this point to mobilize Nigerians to, renegotiate their future. Our constitution we need to have a people's constitution that makes Nigeria work. And that's not where we are at this time. I think that's very clear to everyone.
So the National Assembly, as it is now, is currently going through a constitution review process. They have asked for submissions from various people and groups, and those submissions are coming in. Now, the thing is, you're planning to get Nigerians together, but at the end of the day, the decisions will be made at the National Assembly. You've made some recommendations, that is, but so how do you plan to link this really such that what your group or the ideas that you come up with will translate well to the National Assembly, and eventually when this process starts, those recommendations and ideas that you have put forward will indeed be part of what would be implemented? How do you plan to link that connect? Because it's political parties that are there at the National Assembly.
Well, I mean, first of all, I want to tell you that it's not, the National Assembly being involved and the Nigerian people being involved, they are not mutually exclusive. The reality of today, though, and let me just start from the basics. We believe that what Nigeria needs is a new constitution, not a panel-beaten current constitution. Because the challenges that Nigeria faces in terms of nationhood today are so fundamental and so deep. The divides are so strong that perhaps, and the loss of legitimacy of the Nigerian state, many Nigerians today do not see the Nigerian state as legitimate in their own eyes. And the best way to do this is to fashion out a people's constitution. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there is no role for the National Assembly, but I think that the National Assembly itself has become part of the crisis of legitimacy in the eyes of the Nigerian people. And so people need to come together in some form to be also part of this process, whether it's in the form of some sort of, national conference or what, those are things that can be decided as we go along. But there is need for a far wider approach to a new constitution for Nigeria if it is to have the necessary legitimacy that will stabilize our country going forward.
Well, the challenge of legitimacy is most certainly something of concern, and it's something that has been talked about over and over again. But then, as Kayode has said, the decisions are made at the level of people who have political office, who have political power, who can take decisions on behalf of the people. So that leads to the question of the leadership recruitment system, because if we do not have the right kind of people, the right set of people in power, the question of trust, the question of legitimacy in the eyes of the people is going to be there. So question then to you is, what is the issue with our leadership recruitment system, and how can people take ownership of that process, even with the laws that we have?
Yes. Well, let me tell you, first of all, the issue with the current recruitment system. The current recruitment system is a political industrial complex that works in favor of the political class, but does not work in favor of the people. And so therefore it subverts the very purpose of development, which is to be a government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's become essentially, our democracy has descended into a government by politicians for politicians and of politicians. And this is not what democracy is supposed to be. And this is why we have a crisis of legitimacy today. The Nigerian people can see that their hopes and aspirations are not represented in the work broadly of the political class today. Now, this is not a sweeping condemnation of everybody who is a politician, but the fact is that as a class, the politicians have not delivered what Nigerians expect from them. Now, the way to go forward is that Nigerian citizens themselves have a role to play. And they themselves have also not played this role as actively as they should, which is that they are actually the boss. They are the boss of the politicians. They're supposed to be the ones whose voice is heard. What they want is what is supposed to be done. But because they are weak, because they are poor, because they are hungry, because they are illiterate, the politicians have actually now turned to using them to legitimize themselves and to keep themselves in power every 4-year cycle. So we have a ritual of democracy, but denies the power thereof of a real democracy. And what happens is that Nigerians have fallen for a scam. They vote for structures, political structures, that are able to win elections, win, quote unquote, however, but they're not able to govern effectively. And this is where we need to get Nigerian citizens to say, look, we now need to begin to select leaders, not just successful politicians. That's the point of public education I think we need to engage in and on.
You know, pretty much nailed the problem, which is that of poverty at various levels, not just of, of the pocket and all of that, but even of capacity for people to, do the things that they need to do. So at a time when people say that poverty has been weaponized, how then do the people think differently from the way they are thinking now, given, as you have said, that they are very, very limited at this point?
Yes, but it's not, all hope is not lost. We're not supposed to sit around and admire the problem and throw our hands up in the air and say, well, it's what it is. No, that's why Nigerians of conscience have stepped forward and they've said, we need to educate. We need to educate our people to know what they should do, to know how to select leadership, to be informed voters. There are many groups involved in this. It's not just the National Consultative Front, I should be clear. For example, I'm part of another group called To Build a Nation, TBAN, and we are also involved in massive education campaigns for the citizens of Nigeria. So people need to be re-educated politically. We need to have politically conscious Nigerians, not just people who focus on, going after their daily bread and forget the fact that when you do that, you actually leave the space to be populated by all kinds of people who may turn out to be the wrong kinds of people. So we have lots of successful transactional politicians in Nigeria, but leadership is quite scarce. And we need to train the focus on leadership. What is a leader? At the level of a local government, at the level of a state assembly, at the level of a governor, at the level of the National Assembly, at the level of the presidency. We need men and women of vision, men and women of character, men and women of integrity, people who are committed and live and breathe the prosperity and the security of Nigeria. That's the kind of people we should be electing into public office and appointing into public office.
Well, it would seem that that pool of people which you just talked about seems to be decreasing by the minute. And it looks like they're I don't know if they're, very available amongst young people, who just haven't been noticed just yet. However, when you talk about the people shying away from their responsibility and not having owned their role as bosses of the politicians, some people will say perhaps they just don't know how. So, for instance, we saw the Sorosoke movement, the End SARS movement last year, and a lot of people had high hopes that perhaps that could transform or transmute itself into some political movement. But that is yet to happen. Assuming that were to happen, assuming we were to, get some of the benefits from that coming into mainstream politics, how would you suggest that sort of movement, becomes that which is more than just a protest, but also getting involved actively in politics?
Yes. First of all, the NSAS, protests by the youth. I'm speaking about the actual peaceful NSAS. I'm not talking about the various mutations that later came up, like variants of the COVID pandemic. What we are talking about is the actual protest itself that was peaceful and legitimate. First of all, it gives us hope that all hope is not lost. It tells us that our young people are finally coming to realize that the future of Nigeria belongs to them, and they have to make a choice as to whether, the posterity of Nigeria will belong to them, or whether all they will do is simply to inherit our foreign debts. So in terms of translating that, the way to go is to go into structural politics. That is to say, to join political parties, to be able to vote, to register and to vote, and to be able to be voted for. And that brings us to the current electoral bill amendment question. That is so critical. Even as we fight or struggle for a new constitution, the immediate thing before us is the Electoral Amendment Act. It's the low-hanging fruit, because it will be completed within the next couple of months, hopefully, and we should insist that it provides a transparent process of electing our leaders where our votes count, not just the people who count the votes. Not just the people who count the votes count, but our votes count. So that's what we should ensure. And I personally believe that this should be done through a system of electronic voting, electronic transmission of results. And as I have said, anything that creates loopholes and gaps for election results to be fiddled with or to be manipulated, we must avoid it, because that's part of what removes confidence from our democratic process and leaves a lot of citizens apathetic, because they say, well, they will just rig the election now, so why should I bother? We have to move away from this.
And some people will say that, to a large extent, we have been able to tackle electoral fraud. Yes, sometimes it does look like we make 2 steps forward and then take 1 step back. However, it does appear that we're making some progress with the electoral system. There are those who believe that electronic voting does not hold the be-all, end-all of political malfeasance. Because you just talked about a structure. The fact that what it seems that Nigerians do every 4 years is uphold an electoral, a political structure, which is then unable to govern. The question is, how do you change the internal workings of political parties, particularly the major political parties, in such a way that they're able to eventually deliver the dividends of democracy? Yes, there were parties like yours, which a lot of people also felt had hope, but gaining ground mainstream, so to speak, was a challenge. You don't agree?
Well, yes, first of all, let me be clear. Right now, I do not belong to any political party. I'm operating on a non-partisan basis at this time. And of course, if and when I join another political party or any political party, I will make that announcement. So that's just to be very clear, factually speaking. Now, I do not believe this myth, this emphasis in quote unquote major political parties. Nigeria is still a very young democracy. And I think that all parties have a chance. And even though, yes, we have a couple of dominant ones right now, but if we go by recent history, we don't know what the future will be. In 2013 or 2012, there was only the PDP, which was busy boasting that it would rule Nigeria for the next 60 years. And within a year or two, it was out of power from another formation. So as we move along, there'll be shifting sands as we build our culture of democracy. And what our parties need to do, all parties, not just the so-called major parties, is to train their candidates in leadership. And there are many initiatives that are going on now, including the one called Fixed Politics right now, that are quite good in terms of the desire to train candidates or potential candidates about what they should be and what they should do if and when they get to office. So it's a matter of training for leadership at every level of the political engagement, local, state, national. That's what should happen. And all political parties must invest in this process. That's the way forward.
Well, Prof, you contested, campaigned, you moved around different parts of the country seeking to be elected. Ultimately, it didn't turn out the way you want. But at the moment, we've got a lot of young people who, quite frankly, are frustrated. They're leaving the country. They're thinking about leaving the country right now. They'll grab any chance of that they've got. But you're still optimistic. What gives you optimism thinking that these things could work out?
Well, the process of building a nation, it takes time. Nobody's happy about where Nigeria is 60 years from independence. We cannot generate more than 5,000 megawatts of electricity. That's just a crying shame. In terms of your reference to my run, and it didn't end how I would have wished. Yes, but that's part of the political process. Don't forget that the man who is the president today ran 4 times. And on the 4th occasion, he won. So in politics, there are different kinds of victories. There is the victory that you may achieve today at a ballot box, but there may be longer term kinds of strategic victories. And that's the context in which I saw my first attempt in 2019. I was not a money bag, but yet we were able to raise hope and a lot of enthusiasm on the part of millions of Nigerians. And I think if we had had a better electoral system, you might have seen different results. Not necessarily that we would have defeated the APC and the PDP, but the results that were announced may have been rather different if the system was more transparent. So I take the point that our political electoral system is creepingly improving. The Edo State elections, I think, were an improvement on what happened in Kogi State. And we are hoping that in 2023, we will see even better organized elections. But the key is for INEC to engage in voter registration as early as possible. That's the key. Start registering new voters and start making your preparations operationally. Do not wait until the election is upon you, and then you have to postpone elections and disenfranchise millions of people.
Prof, it will seem like the Pareto principle is what is always at play in our politics. Let me take an angle of Chimele's question to you. Now, having gone all over Nigeria, seen all kinds of things, depending on whose data you're looking at, a good number of Nigerians are youths, especially the voting population. More than 50% at the least are youths.
Absolutely.
Now, also in the voting population are a good number of people who are very, very lowly educated and who are easily moved by whatever it is that they hear from anyone. Taking them through that political education, both the youths who are themselves, as Chamberlain said, frustrated and depressed and almost lacking, direction or vision or hope for the future. Getting them to line up to this optimism that you have is quite a task. And bringing them on board of nationhood, of hopes in this nation is quite a task. Yet, the nation must move on. And these youths that we're talking about are the future of the nation. So,
absolutely,
you would say that it's quite a task. How do we take this on?
Yes, I mean, many of us are already taking on this task. I personally have been engaged with a lot of youth groups. When I ran in 2019, most of my support came from young people, young men and women, who I believed then and still believe now are the hope of our future. No country, no nation can regenerate itself without its youth. The young shall grow and the old shall die. This is a biological fact. And therefore, it presents us with an imperative that our young people must stand up, take the bull by the horns, and do the work of nation building. So we are engaging with young people all over the country. And I personally am doing so quite a lot. And I think that from the End SARS movement, again, it seemed as if it's gone into, shall we say, abeyance. But don't assume so. Don't assume that spirit cannot be awakened again. if necessary. So I think young people need to. That has shown them that they themselves can do it. They have more confidence in themselves now, and I think that as we go along towards 2023 and 2027 and future elections, young people will take on a more and more robust role in Nigeria's democracy. That's already happening, but we would like to see it happen even faster.
As we wind down now, Prof, this political movement, because we are reading in some quarters that eventually the long-term goal or plan is that it will be a mega party. So what happens at that stage?
Yes, I mean, look, like I said, the NCF at this point is a political movement of, concerned Nigerians. And their focus right now is not a short-term focus of elections or 2023. Their main focus right now is to address the foundations of the Nigerian state in a positive way, and that is to have a new people's constitution. But the movement does not rule out evolving into a political platform in the future that could contest elections. So that's what I'm saying, and I think it's very important that we're accurate in representing the work of the National Consultative Forum. Nigerians love to hear about political parties, new this, new that, but we must be accurate. Certainly, I will be in presenting the National Consultative Forum. At this time, it is not a political party. It is a political movement of concerned Nigerians. But the future, who can tell?
Okay. Well, at the moment, if we get the Electoral Act passed by the National Assembly, I think they talk about sometime in June or thereabout. So if that goes well and is signed into law by the president, will there still be so much of a need for us to get a new constitution? Because if we get the Electoral Act, chances are that we would have started addressing the leadership recruitment process, the challenge that we've got with that.
Because that's a very important point that you have raised. Now, an amended Electoral Act that provides for truly transparent elections helps a lot in the process of nation building and selecting our leaders and recruiting our leaders, yes. But there are problems that we have in Nigeria today that are so foundational that regardless of who you elect, those problems will remain very serious and debilitating for us as a country if we do not change our constitution. The number one is this, that Nigeria is supposedly the Federal Republic of Nigeria, but in reality, we are not practicing federalism the way we should. The center is too powerful. And that is stifling the growth of the country's different regions. It is creating a lot of ethnic tension because of the struggle for power in Abuja. Whereas if a lot of powers were devolved downward locally to the regions and they can run their own affairs, Nigeria will make far more progress, because as every region and every state is making progress, the collective, the whole country is making progress. This is why we need a new constitution. And this is why without a new constitution that brings about a true federalism, the dependence on oil, the worship of the God of small things, as I call it, will continue. And we will continue to borrow, we will continue to be stressed. Even if you have competent leaders, they will be like Sisyphus, rolling the big boulder up the hill, but never quite being able to go across the top. And the stone will always drag them back. They try again, it drags them back. The best way to solve this is through constitutional reform.
Thank you for talking to us this morning, Professor Kingsley Moghalu.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.